Hi, welcome to VG English. TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. Yes, today we're gonna discuss about TESOL, T-E-S-O-L. There are 10 modules. Number 1, teaching and learning. Number 2, linguistics. Number 3, reading. Number 4, writing. Number 5, speaking. Number 6, listening. Number 7, pedagogy. Number 8, lesson plan. Number 9, classroom management. Number 10, getting a TESOL job. Model 1, teaching and learning. Learning a new language can be difficult. So, teaching a new language inherently comes with great obstacles. To effectively teach English to someone new to the language, you must understand many things, including the basics of English language, how speakers occur a new language, and how to motivate students to succeed when they are struggling. In this module, we will discuss the basics of how to get started, including taking a hard look at how to access the motivations of new students, how to use their previous language and cultural background to your advantage, and how to get them started on the path to English fluency. Module 1, teaching and learning. Motivation, understanding cultural backgrounds, the importance of a first language, getting started. Motivation, teaching any subject involves knowing how motivation affects a student. Without proper motivation, it will be difficult for students to accept what they are learning and commit to the process. Since learning a new language can be one of the hardest academic endeavors there is, it is even more important that you, the teacher, understand the motivation behind your students' commitment to learning and use it to your advantage. We will discuss motivation by first breaking it down into its two smaller parts. First one is intrinsic motivation, second one is extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is the best stepping stone to success, but you can't teach it. Intrinsic motivation characterizes someone who is compelled to do something for internal rewards. This type of motivation is powerful because extrinsic rewards can be fleeting or disappointing, but an internal drive to succeed will almost always motivate an individual. While you cannot teach someone to be intrinsically motivated, you can help your students access intrinsic motivation. They may not know they are already possessed or that they may have lost for the moment. If you know your students are intrinsically motivated, you can help them succeed. Here are some tips to access and use your students' intrinsic motivation. Number 1, get to the root of what is driving the individual. While they may only acknowledge an extrinsic motivation for learning English, you may be able to help them tie that to a grander internal drive. For example, if students come to you wanting to learn English because they are moving to an English-speaking country, and it will be helpful to know the language, the superficial part of their reasoning points toward extrinsic motivation. However, this extrinsic motivator points to something internal, the desire to fit in and not feel like an outsider. Number 2, understand the basis for most forms of intrinsic motivation. William Glasser, an American psychiatrist, published a theory in 1998 proposing that humans have essential needs that dictate our emotional health. These needs are the need to belong or connect, the need for power or competence, the need for freedom, and the need to have fun. Having these needs in mind could help you when designing your lesson. Which of these needs is this lesson satisfying? This is a way to get away from the punishment and a reward system that is meant to access an individual extrinsic motivation. Number two, be aware that intrinsic motivation cannot be forced and does not abide by the classical reward and punishment system that many people follow. For example, if someone is not reacting to your lesson, it is not going to be helpful to intentionally make them feel that they don't belong. For intrinsic motivation to succeed, the individual needs to feel like he or she is in control of the situation. So try to access your students' internal drive, but don't force them. Second one, extrinsic motivation. While extrinsic motivation is not nearly as strong as intrinsic motivation, it is much easier as the teacher. For you to control, extrinsic motivation refers to the external force compelling an individual to do something for a reward because of their ease of use in teaching. Extrinsic motivators are often the basis for educational programs. The most common extrinsic motivator, the assignment of grades. Teachers can simply reward good behavior and punish bad behavior by assigning grades accordingly. A student who hands in their project, follows directions, and effectively addresses the purpose of the project is rewarded with an A. Whereas a student who doesn't is punished with an F. Why it works? Even though, as stated previously, the drive initiated by extrinsic motivation pales in comparison to intrinsic motivation, that doesn't mean you cannot find success with extrinsic motivation. These motivators access an individual's desires to find success, even if someone else defines that success. Here are some examples of extrinsic motivators that work in the classroom. Grades. This is the most obvious extrinsic motivator. Individuals want to be successful and they feel better when they receive a high score as opposed to a low score. If you teach in a high school setting, grades can mean the difference as to whether or not the students get into college. So grades can be a good motivator for students. Even when there is no next level, however, many students will be motivated to succeed by grades. Next one is competition. Many individuals have an innate desire to be the winners, and putting your students in competition with each other can be a good way to motivate them to succeed, especially if the ongoing results are available to all students. This approach is often used by teachers of younger students with such things as performance charts, where teachers give students who do well some sort of visible reward, such as a gold star. Conversely, teachers can punish negative behaviors by posting the name of the student in question on the board as someone who is not behaving. This can sometimes help motivate students to succeed because they would like to better than their classmates. Then next one, extra rewards and punishments. Besides grades, some teachers will offer extra incentive to succeed. Perhaps in the form of prizes. A teacher might for example, make an agreement with a student that if he or she improves, then he or she can go on the class trip. Conversely, punishments such as detentions or phone calls home can be a consequence that motivates a student. Okay, which type of motivation is better? Let me tell you clearly, while intrinsic motivation is stronger than extrinsic motivation, it is not very immediate and therefore can lose effect in the short term. Extrinsic motivation can be very helpful in the short term, but is often only temporary. For that reason, the best type of motivation is a combination of the two. Even students with intrinsic motivation sometimes need to be motivated by extrinsic rewards and punishments to keep them on track. Here are some examples of how you can use both intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation to help your students. We will start with an example we have previously used. An individual would like to learn English because she is moving to an English speaking country. Whether she realizes it, this can be an example of intrinsic motivation and her need to fit in and be successful. You can help her assess this by asking her to write down the reasons why she thinks it would be helpful to learn English and then look deeply into those reasons. While this desire can be a strong motivator, you may find that this student begins slacking off during your lessons. She may be having trouble seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Using extrinsic motivators such as grades or rewards can help her over the hurdle and get back on track. The lasting motivation that will drive her to succeed in the need to fit in, but the temporary motivation of grades or reward will help her succeed when she is having trouble seeing the finish line. A man comes to you and tells you he wants to learn English so he can get a promotion and make more money in his corporate career. While money and prestige are both extrinsic motivators, the need for approval and competence is intrinsic. This is an individual who is driven by the desire to succeed, so extrinsic motivators will be very effective on him. If he wants to use this as a way of advancing his career, then he will likely want to learn English while attaining the highest grades or scores possible so he can flaunt his success. This is the extrinsic carrot that you can use to help him. A woman feels stuck in a job that is stifling and wants to pursue a career that requires her to know English and comes to you for help. This individual is intrinsically motivated is to take their cultural background into account. Instead of trying to present you all the potential cultural backgrounds your students bring to the table, we are instead going to focus on why it is important to consider your students' backgrounds and why it can be useful to adjust your instruction to better addressing the varying backgrounds of your students. By her need for control and freedom, she is less likely to be motivated by outside influences and more likely to be motivated by a less overbearing and prescribed teaching style. However, she may still require some extrinsic motivators to continue striving for success. So, you may need to let her frame her own definition of success and then grade her on the framework she created. This will give her the freedom she wants while still holding her personally accountable for her actions. Then next, understanding cultural backgrounds. One of the first steps you need to take as an educator, an individual would like to learn English because she is moving to an English speaking country. Whether she realizes it, this can be an example of intrinsic motivation and her need to fit. Why is it important to understand your students' cultural backgrounds? It's very simple. Language is directly related to culture because language is fluid and changes over time as the culture of region changes. This is why such languages like Italian and French can both originate from Latin, but still be fundamentally different. Latin was taken to these regions and it developed as the culture of the region developed, taking two very different paths in Italian and French. So, as much as it is important to teach cultural elements as you teach English, it is important to take into account the importance of individual cultural origins. These cultural backgrounds can not only affect the way they learn a new language, but also the way they learn in general. Here are some ways that an individual's cultural background can affect their learning of a new language. A student's environment can have an enormous effect on the way they learn. Studies have shown that language acquisition is considerably affected by an individual background. And while learning a new language isn't the same as the learning your first language, environment can still be important in an individual learning a second language. A student who comes from a home that values education comes from a home that nurtures what he or she is learning. A student who comes from a home that values life experience over formal education might have more difficulty with the traditional lessons. Students from various cultural backgrounds will react to different styles of teaching in different ways. Some of your students may be coming from a background of very strict teacher-led instruction. Others may be coming from a background of more free-led instruction. While both styles have merit, you will find yourself needing to use differentiation to properly reach both of these students. You can determine how to best meet the needs of your students by simply asking them through an informal conversation or a standard pretest. Let your students tell you how they learn best and adjust your teaching to appeal to their needs. An individual's culture background can affect the way they think, which can affect the student's performance in your classroom. Taking your students' cultural background into account when you are designing and implementing your instruction will help you account for the potential different ways that your students think. The importance of a first language. Of course, more important than understanding your students' cultural background is understanding how their first language will affect the speed and ease which they learn English as a new language. While a student's cultural background can affect the way they learn, a student's native language can affect the way they view the language to begin with. What are some of the obstacles students face when trying to learn English as a second language? Language barriers. Of course, every language has its own rules, and while many languages share similarities that make new language acquisition simpler, some students will be trying to transition to a new set of rules and language structure. Here are some examples of how language is structured differently. Some languages have been created based on symbols or pictures that represent ideas rather than words made of letters. The transition to English from languages that follow such a structure can be very difficult. Some languages are read from right to left rather than left to right, which is how English is read. This does not necessarily affect a student's ability to gain proficiency in speaking the language, but it certainly presents a hurdle for students trying to learn to read English. Many languages require a different sentence structure than English does. One of the most common examples is when languages place adjective differently in a sentence than they are in English. In English, someone might say, "Go, get a blue car." That same sentence in some languages would translate back to English as, "Go, get the car blue." This can make fluency difficult. Many students will be confused by the way verbs are conjugated in English. Many languages have set rules that apply to the conjugation of most verbs, while English can seem like a free for all at times. How can we use our students' native languages to our advantage? While a new language like English will certainly present obstacles for your students to overcome, there are ways you can take those obstacles and turn them into advantages. If students are coming to class already understanding a language other than English, why not use that to help them learn better? Here are some ways that teachers can use a student's native language to help them learn a new language. It is important that you understand cognates and how to use them. A cognate is a word or root word used in different languages and has a similar etymological background. In other words, you can provide a link for your students between their native language and English. These cognates can be little pockets of comfort for your students as they tread into the unknown territory of a new language. Developing further on the above point, emphasize breaking words down to their roots as you are teaching them. This helps students have a better understanding of the patterns of the English language, which will help them succeed more quickly. This makes it easier for students to link the two languages through cognates, but also makes it easier for students to make connections between new words they are learning. The next, using different texts is a good way to help students ease into the new language. Providing a translated version of the text may change the structure, connotation, and intent, but it will give the student a frame of reference when they get stuck. Translated text can be a crutch for a new language learners, but if they are used properly, they can work as a guide to help students feel more comfortable with a new language. Try asking questions in the student's native language, but ask them to answer in English, or switch it around and ask them questions in English that they need to answer in their native language. This may be more work for you, depending on the diversity of your classroom, but it can help students ease into understanding English. Use your students' native language to help scaffold and model in English. This can be as simple as having your students write in their native language and then showing them how it would look in English. You could then ask them to do the same thing following your model. Unfortunately, this may require you to be fluent in many languages, but you can work through it with the student if you don't speak their native language. Have your students help each other. Even if the students do not speak the same native language, they are going through the same process and can bond in their desire to learn English and help each other learn. Next one, getting started. It is no mystery that teaching students a new language is a difficult task, but it can be infinitely rewarding. So, how do you actually get started on your career? The first step, of course, you have already taken, which is to seek training. Let's take a look at some other important aspects of successfully helping your students. First of all, ensuring your success. Here are some basic tips to ensure that you are successful and able to help your students learn English as a second language. Make sure you are well versed in the structure and makeup of English language. We will discuss many things you need to know, but it couldn't hurt to supplement this course with further study of the language. The English language is incredibly complex and full of rules that are not necessarily logical, so it will always help you to study up. While we will give you many tools to become an effective teacher of English as a second language, it is important you continually seek out research and professional journals, articles to keep up with the current educational trends. We are constantly discovering how we attend language and how we learn. So teaching English as a second language is a lifelong educational commitment. Make sure you understand how learners acquire new language. As we have discussed early in this module, that doesn't just refer to the language acquisition, but to knowledge acquisition as a whole. Learn everything you need to know about differentiation to give your students the best chance to succeed in learning their new language. Be prepared to be patient. If you do not come from a teaching background, you may not be aware of the patience it takes to help someone learn something new. If you do come from a teaching background, then understand this may be the most difficult thing to teach someone, and you will need to be even more patient than you may have expected. Continually use your experiences to build strategies and concepts that work for your students. All the training in the world will help you, but the true answer to your questions of how will come from experience. Make sure you don't forget any of the lessons you learn along the way. First of all, understanding the basics. There is a basic framework you will need to follow to be successful in helping students learn a new language. While we will discuss most of these concepts in detail in future modules, here is an overview to help you get started on your path to success. Linguistics. Helping your students understand the basics of linguistics will help ensure that they understand the basics of how the English language is structured, how we break down and diagram the components of a sentence, and how we communicate in English. This concept will give students a structure on which to build their true understanding of the language. Then next, reading. Reading is one of the first skills you will develop with your students. It is typically where most teachers of English as a second language begin, because having words in front of the students can make them feel more comfortable when trying to decipher them. Students can learn to see words and sound them out with the guidance of the word in front of them. Then next, writing. The next step is usually to work on your student's skill is writing in English. They will have the guidance of the words in front of them as they do when they learn to read, but it requires them to take the next step because they will be the ones producing the words. This is a great time for students to work on the linguistic principles they already studied and practice sentence structure, syntax, and other basic concepts of English. The next, speaking. Speaking can be the most difficult part of learning a new language. Having to sound the words out loud can add an extra level of anxiety because everyone in the class will hear the student if they make a mistake. Creating a classroom of respect and support can go a long way to assuage your students' anxiety. If the students feels comfortable enough that they are not afraid to make mistakes in front of the class, they will be more willing to take risks. The next, listening. While listening is arguably a more difficult skill than speaking concerning a new language, students often feel more comfortable with it because they are not required to put themselves out there as much. However, listening is the next step after the students begin learning to speak the language. If a student can listen to something in English, comprehend it, and respond properly, they are exhibiting a complex understanding of the language and are usually doing it without a visual reference.